Forget everything you think you know about information sharing before modern technology. What if I told you that prehistoric humans had a communication system so effective, it rivaled some of the complexities we see in today's digital age? The bird call was wrong. Kari froze mid-step, his hand instinctively reaching for the sharpened obsidian blade at his waist. That wasn't the song of the gray lory. It was too sharp, too urgent. His cousin's voice, disguised as birdsong, cutting through the morning air like a blade. Predator, big, coming from the east. This was the first alert network humanity ever invented, a system of vocal mimicry so sophisticated that danger could be communicated across valleys without a single predator understanding the warning. No modern technology required, just the ancient internet, running on human ingenuity alone. Kari's eyes swept the grassland. There, movement through the tall reeds near the water hole. The tawny shape of a lioness, her muscles rippling beneath golden fur as she stalked closer. But Kari wasn't her target. His entire extended family group, 18 souls scattered across the feeding grounds, was about to walk into an ambush. Another bird call erupted from Kari's throat. This one mimicked the alarm cry of the superb starling. Scatter, hide, silent. Within seconds, bodies disappeared into the landscape. A grandfather dropped behind a termite mound. 2 women melted into a thicket. Young hunters pressed themselves flat against sun-warmed stones. The lioness emerged from the reeds, her amber eyes scanning the suddenly empty plain. Confused, she circled once, then retreated into the shadows. Not a single human was harmed, not because of weapons, not because of strength, because information had traveled faster than claws. This is what we've forgotten about our prehistoric ancestors. They didn't just survive the ancient world. They built the most resilient communication network in human history. A network where knowledge wasn't stored in devices, but in minds. Where messages didn't need Wi-Fi, just whispers. Where a single piece of information, shared at the right moment, could mean the difference between extinction and survival. And it all started with something we take for granted today. The desperate human need to share what we know before it's too late. East Africa. The sun hammers down on an endless savanna where grass stretches to the horizon like a golden ocean. A band of Homo erectus, 16 individuals, moves in practice formation through territory they've walked for generations. But today, everything is about to change. The lead hunter, a weather-beaten woman named Nama, spots something that makes her blood run cold. Fresh tracks in the mud near the river crossing, massive paw prints, a male lion, possibly 2, marking territory where her people need to pass. Here's where prehistoric humans reveal their genius. Nama doesn't panic. Instead, she crouches and begins arranging stones in a specific pattern. 3 flat rocks stacked vertically, with a 4th placed pointing east. Then she takes red ochre from her carrying pouch, the same pigment they use for tool-making ceremonies, and marks the top stone. To a casual observer, this means nothing. To her people, it's a flashing red warning sign that will remain visible for weeks. Critical danger, lion territory, alternative route to the east. But Nama knows her work isn't finished. Information that stays in one place dies with the landscape. Information that moves becomes power. 2 days later, another family group approaches the river crossing. They're not from Nama's band, they're distant relatives, people she sees perhaps twice a year during seasonal gatherings. But when their scout spots the stone arrangement, he stops immediately. He reads the warning as clearly as you're reading these words. His group diverts east, following the safer route. They survive because of knowledge they didn't personally discover. The grapevine effect has begun. Information spreading across tribal boundaries like electricity through copper wire. Except these wires are made of shared symbols, common understanding, and the universal human instinct that says, if I know something that could save your life, I must tell you. That night, around their own fire, the scout shares what he learned. The younger members absorb it, adding it to their mental maps. When they travel this route next year, they'll remember. And if they see something dangerous, they'll leave their own markers. This is how tribal trade routes became data highways. Not through individual genius, but through the collective decision that survival information was too valuable to keep secret. Ideas, dangers, and discoveries spread across the ancient world through a network of exchanges that happened at every waterhole, every seasonal gathering, every chance encounter on the savannah. The sophisticated communication system we call civilization wasn't invented by scribes in ancient cities. It was battle-tested on the African plains by people who understood a fundamental truth. Shared knowledge multiplies survival. Hoarded knowledge dies with the hoarder. The flint was wrong. Kobo turned it over in his calloused hands, frustrated. He'd been trying to create a new kind of blade, thinner, sharper, with a more precise edge for butchering. But every strike of the hammerstone produced the same thick, clumsy results. Then his grandfather sat down beside him. No words at first, just observation. The old man picked up a piece of flint, studied it in the fading light, then made a subtle adjustment to Kobo's grip. He showed him how to angle the hammerstone differently, how to read the grain of the stone, like some people read clouds for rain. Within minutes, Kobo struck a perfect flake, thin as a leaf, sharp as a lion's tooth. This is knowledge transfer at its most intimate, from hand to hand, from eyes watching to hands doing. The intricate step-by-step transmission of complex skills that took generations to develop, but could be downloaded into a new mind in mere hours through careful demonstration and apprenticeship. But here's where the story becomes explosive. Kobo doesn't keep this knowledge to himself. 3 months later, at a seasonal gathering where 5 different family groups converge near a permanent spring, Kobo demonstrates his new technique. Hunters from other tribes crowd around, watching intently. Some ask questions through gesture and limited vocabulary. Others simply observe, their minds cataloging every movement, every angle, every subtle detail. Within a year, this improved blade design appears in tool caches across a territory spanning 500 square kilometers. Information has just traveled further than any single human walked. This is the social learning imperative, the uniquely human drive to not just learn, but to teach, to not just discover, but to demonstrate. Anthropologists call it cultural transmission. Our ancestors would have called it something simpler, keeping each other alive through shared wisdom. And it didn't stop with tools. Medicinal plants discovered by one group's healer spread to neighboring communities. Techniques for starting fires in wet conditions moved across regions. Strategies for driving game into ambush zones became standardized across tribal networks. Even artistic expressions, the way people decorated tools or bodies, became a shared vocabulary. A way of saying, we belong to the same information network. Think about that for a moment. Specialization and knowledge sharing existed before agriculture, before cities, before writing. The elder who knew how to read weather patterns, the healer who understood which root stopped bleeding, the tracker who could read an animal's intentions from disturbed grass. Each person was a living library, and the community was their download network. But this system had a vulnerability, one that would eventually force humanity to develop new ways of preserving information. The fever came without warning. Tala, the eldest healer in her community of early Homo sapiens, collapsed beside the fire one evening. By morning, her skin burned like sun-heated stone. The younger healers hovered anxiously, applying cool mud poultices, offering water. But everyone knew the terrible truth. If Tala died, decades of accumulated knowledge died with her. She was the keeper of plant medicine, which roots stopped infections, which leaves reduced fever, which bark could be chewed to ease the pain of childbirth. She knew the locations of rare mineral deposits used in tool making. She remembered the routes to distant water sources that only flowed during certain seasons. Most critically, she carried stories passed down from her grandmother's grandmother, stories that encoded survival information in memorable narrative form. This was the fragility of prehistoric information systems. Knowledge lived in brains, and brains were terrifyingly mortal. For 3 days, Tala drifted in and out of consciousness. During her lucid moments, something remarkable happened. The community gathered, not just the healers, everyone. And Tala began to speak, her voice weak but determined. She wasn't just sharing information, she was conducting an emergency backup of her entire mental database. The younger healers leaned close, absorbing the details of plant identification. The hunters listened as she described game migration patterns observed over 40 seasonal cycles. The elders asked questions, helping draw out memories even Tala had forgotten she possessed. Children sat in wide-eyed silence, their young minds recording stories they wouldn't fully understand for years. This was information disparity at its most dramatic. The moment a community collectively realized that access to vital knowledge could define who lived and who died, who thrived and who struggled. 4 days later, Tala's fever broke. She survived. But the experience transformed her community's approach to information sharing. From that point forward, critical knowledge wasn't entrusted to single individuals. It was redundantly distributed across multiple people, like data backed up across multiple servers. The network adapted. It became more resilient. Young people were deliberately taught by multiple elders, ensuring no single death could create a catastrophic knowledge gap. Important survival information was woven into songs and stories that everyone learned, not just specialists. Even children became active nodes in the information network, carriers of cultural memory that might not activate for decades. And perhaps most ingeniously, communities developed what we might call knowledge verification systems. When someone shared information, a new water source, an edible plant, a dangerous predator's territory, others would independently verify it before fully integrating it into the collective knowledge base. This wasn't primitive superstition. This was prehistoric fact-checking. The adaptability engine had evolved. Early humans weren't just surviving. They were building increasingly sophisticated systems for managing information flow, allowing them to rapidly adapt to new environments and challenges in ways no other species could match. The coastline stretched ahead like a promise. A small band of Homo sapiens, perhaps 60 individuals, stood at the edge of the African continent, staring across waters toward unknown lands. Behind them, everything they knew. Ahead, everything they didn't. This is the moment human information networks went global. These weren't desperate refugees fleeing catastrophe. These were successful people making an incomprehensible decision to abandon reliable food sources, establish shelters, and well-mapped territories to walk into the complete unknown. Why? Because information had given them confidence. Stories had been circulating for generations about lands beyond the horizon. Traders who traveled coastal routes brought back accounts of different animals, different plants, different patterns of rain and drought. Some scouts had ventured further than others, returning with seashells from distant beaches and descriptions of landscapes no one in their home community had ever seen. The ancient internet had done something remarkable. It had made the unknowable feel almost familiar. Through accumulated stories, these migrants carried mental maps of places they'd never visited. They knew, or thought they knew, what to expect. But here's where it gets interesting. They were wrong about almost everything. The first few years were brutal. Plants that looked edible were toxic. Weather patterns followed completely different rhythms. Predators behaved in ways that defied all their inherited knowledge. The old information systems, built over thousands of generations in African environments, suddenly became dangerous liabilities. Dozens died, learning what was safe and what wasn't. But here's what didn't happen. They didn't give up and go back. Instead, something extraordinary occurred. The rate of information sharing accelerated dramatically. Every new discovery, poisonous plant, freshwater source, animal behavior, was immediately and urgently transmitted through the group. The old, leisurely pace of knowledge transfer couldn't work anymore. Survival demanded rapid, constant communication. Evening gatherings around fires became intense information-sharing sessions. The hunters described every new animal track they'd encountered. The gatherers detailed every plant they'd tested. The scouts drew maps in sand and ash, documenting coastlines and river systems. Children were drilled relentlessly on safety information: which snakes to avoid, which insects bite, which clouds meant dangerous storms. The network effect accelerated. As these populations moved across Asia, into Europe, across to Australia, and eventually the Americas, they carried something more valuable than any physical tool: an evolved capacity for rapid information exchange. Each new environment forced them to learn faster, share more efficiently, verify more carefully. Communities that built strong internal information networks thrived. Those that didn't, those where elders hoarded knowledge or young people didn't listen or information flowed too slowly, often perished. And here's the beautiful irony. The same information networks that allowed humans to colonize every corner of the planet also kept them connected. Trade routes became data cables. Seasonal gathering sites became information hubs. Even hostile tribes sometimes exchanged survival knowledge because both sides recognized the mutual benefit. By the time Homo sapiens had spread across 6 continents, they'd built the most extensive information network any species had ever created, all without writing a single word. Back in that rock shelter, with hyenas circling outside, Kari finally understood what his grandfather had been trying to teach him. The old man had said, "We survived the great drought, not because we were stronger than the animals, but because we could tell each other where the last water hid." As dawn broke and the hyenas retreated, Kari emerged and did something his ancestors had done for hundreds of thousands of years. He found 3 stones and built a marker, not just to warn about the hyena den, but to point toward the shelter that had saved his life. Some future person, perhaps someone he'd never meet, would see that marker and know someone survived here. This place is safe. This is the ancient internet's final lesson. Modern technology didn't invent information sharing. It didn't create social networks. It didn't pioneer the concept that shared knowledge makes everyone stronger. We've been doing this since before we were fully human. The platforms change. From stone markers to bird calls to cave paintings to oral traditions to written language to fiber optic cables. We survived as a species not because we were the strongest or fastest or most ferocious. We survived because we were the most connected, because we built networks, because we understood that information hoarded is information wasted, but information shared multiplies beyond measure. The surprising parallels are everywhere. Modern social networks mirror prehistoric information hubs. Viral content spreads exactly like survival knowledge spread across ancient trade routes. The influencers of today are just the charismatic storytellers of yesterday, the ones who could make information memorable, shareable, urgent. Even our vulnerability to misinformation echoes prehistoric challenges. Just as ancient humans had to develop verification systems to distinguish reliable knowledge from dangerous rumors, we face the same battle today. The tools change. The challenge remains. The vulnerability of information, that it can be lost, corrupted, or restricted. That threat is as old as humanity. But so is our response: redundancy, sharing, collective preservation. And here's the most powerful reconnection with our ancient instinct. Somewhere in your DNA is the memory of what Nama felt when she placed those warning stones. What Tala experienced when she urgently downloaded her knowledge to the next generation. What Kobo's grandfather knew when he patiently taught a new technique that could save lives. We are the descendants of the ones who shared. The hoarders, the isolationists, the ones who kept their knowledge secret. Their bloodlines ended on the savannah, forgotten by history. But the sharers, the teachers, the ones who built networks of mutual survival, they became us. So the next time you share information online, post a warning about a danger, teach someone a skill, or simply pass along knowledge that might help another human, you're not being modern, you're being ancient. You're running software written in the oldest code humanity possesses. You're keeping the ancient internet alive. If this story of our species' original information network moved you, share it. Not because I'm asking, but because that's what humans do. We pass along what we've learned. It's literally in our DNA. Hit subscribe to dive deeper into the hidden genius of our prehistoric ancestors, the people who built civilizations in their minds long before they built them in stone. And drop a comment. What surprised you most about how information flowed before writing existed? What modern technology do you think our ancestors would have understood immediately? Because the conversation, the eternal human conversation that started around fires on the African savanna, is still happening. And you're part of it.